On July 23rd, former President Donald Trump stood on a makeshift podium at the Texas border. The setting was theatrical, flanked by United States flags, flashing cameras, and rows of stern-faced officials. His message was bold and dramatic: a 30% border tax to end the flow of fentanyl into the United States. The pitch: that this was a national security measure to stop the deadly drug epidemic by squeezing traffickers at the border. But behind the dramatic headlines, something much bigger was unfolding. Within days, that border tax wasn't just about fentanyl. It became a fuse that lit an economic wildfire. Trump followed up the announcement by declaring a new 10% universal tariff on every country that trades with the United States. Standing in front of aging machinery in Detroit, he signaled that virtually every product crossing the American border, from car parts to food, would now cost more. The White House claimed that these twin tariffs could bring in $300 billion by year's end. But what they didn't say is how that money would be collected. From businesses, consumers, and supply chains already stretched thin, the promise to stop fentanyl quickly turned into a global trade shock that's now hitting wallets, factories, and supermarket shelves across North America. Trump says he's building a wall of tariffs to stop poison. But in reality, he may have just opened up a war on trade that's about to shake every corner of the economy. Trump's plan didn't stop with a single wall. The 30% border tax was just the opening move. And then, just days later, the administration rolled out a second blow, a blanket 10% super tariff slapped on every country shipping goods to the United States. Suddenly, America wasn't just targeting fentanyl, it was charging tolls on almost everything that crossed its borders. This double tariff strategy hit like a financial shockwave. Cars, aircraft parts, groceries, lumber, furniture, no category was spared. A car that used to enter the United States with minimal duty now had a 30% charge at the border, plus a 10% global surcharge layered on top. The impact was immediate. Prices began climbing across key sectors that power daily American life. The administration cheered the numbers. The Treasury took in a record $22.2 billion in customs revenue in June alone, 3 times what it collected just a few months earlier in March. But those figures tell only half the story. What they don't mention is that import volumes actually dropped by 13% during that same time. That means the government isn't collecting more money because trade is booming. It's collecting more because each product is being taxed harder. The burden is quietly passed down to regular people through price hikes. And here's the kicker. Despite all this, the drug flow hasn't stopped. In June, U.S. Customs and Border Protection seized 742 pounds of fentanyl. And for the 2024 fiscal year, that number has already exceeded 19,600 pounds. The pipeline of poison hasn't been shut off, but the cost of trying to choke it has now spread across the entire economy. Trump wanted to look tough on crime. Instead, he may have triggered a tidal wave of inflation without solving the root problem. As Trump tightened the screws at the U.S. border, America's 2 closest neighbors didn't just sit back and watch, they pushed back, and fast. Mexico was the first to sound the alarm. President Claudia Sheinbaum called Trump's tariffs political blackmail. She warned that if the U.S. tried to isolate Mexico with punitive taxes, Mexico would respond by rerouting $700 billion worth of exports, from automobiles to wheat, northward to Canada. That's not just a shift in direction. It's a full-blown attempt to redesign the flow of trade in North America, bypassing the U.S. altogether. Sheinbaum's message was clear. If the U.S. bypasses us, we will bypass the U.S. This is where the idea of the Pacific Prairie Corridor comes in. A new supply route linking Mexico to Canada through western ports and railways, effectively replacing the traditional Mexico-Texas-Detroit production chain. Canada, too, wasted no time. At a podium in Toronto, Prime Minister Mark Carney, formerly a central bank governor, declared, "We will not bow to a bad deal. If tariffs come, retaliation will be doubled." Behind that calm tone was a real threat. A leaked cabinet memo revealed that Canada would raise its counter-tariffs on United States steel and aluminum to 50% by the end of July. That deadline didn't move. Only the list of retaliated goods got longer. Even Ontario's Premier Doug Ford jumped into the ring. In a Bloomberg interview, he warned that if the United States kept pushing, Ontario might tax electricity exports to Michigan, a bold move that could disrupt energy supplies to America's industrial heartland. And if that wasn't enough, he mentioned a possible reduction in flow through the Line 5 oil pipeline, which sends 540,000 barrels of crude oil every day to Midwest refineries. In short, Canada and Mexico aren't just retaliating with words. They're holding levers that control energy, trade routes, and supply chains. And they're ready to pull them. The North American economy isn't built on fences. It's built on flows. Every day, parts and products cross the US, Canadian, and Mexican borders in a finely tuned rhythm. But Trump's twin tariffs have thrown that rhythm into chaos. Take a simple automatic transmission housing used in cars. According to the North American Automotive Alliance, that single part crosses the Detroit-Windsor border 6 times before the vehicle is fully assembled. With a 30% tariff at the border, and then a 10% super tariff on top, the cost doesn't just double, it snowballs. By the time that part finishes its journey, its shipping costs alone can increase by up to 48%. And that's just one part. Now just imagine scaling that up to an entire vehicle. A pickup truck could cost $3,000 more, a compact sedan about $1,200, and an electric crossover nearly $4,600 more, before taxes and dealer markups, of course. And, with consumer credit interest rates already up in the double digits, that new car sitting on the lot just got pushed even further out of reach for the average American family. Inventories are starting to swell, and what used to be a 75-day supply of vehicles is now climbing toward 115 days. A warning sign that, consumers are starting to pull back. With inflation creeping up and wages just flatlining, a new car is really starting to look more like a luxury than a necessity. And it's not just cars. From HVAC systems to refrigerators, pretty much anything that relies on cross-border parts is getting more expensive. The supply chain, once seamless, is now fraying at every border checkpoint, slowed down by fees, inspections, and honestly, a lot of uncertainty. This isn't just a trade dispute anymore. It's a direct hit to the heart of how modern North America builds, moves, and buys. Mexico and Canada aren't just reacting. They're strategically targeting the most sensitive parts of the United States economy. And they're doing it with precision. Mexico's retaliation list hits where it hurts. The American heartland. A report from CONCAIM proposes a 35% tariff on United States corn, soybeans, and pork, with additional logistics fees slapped on Texas oil. Even Ohio wheat now faces mandatory health certification procedures, creating costly delays. This is, honestly, a direct threat to farm states like Iowa, Nebraska, and Ohio, whose economies depend heavily on exports to Mexico. Steel is another flashpoint. Mexico's mills in Nuevo León have started cutting shipments to the United States while prioritizing orders from Canada. That means United States construction and manufacturing companies could soon face steel shortages, or pay a premium for what used to be a cheap, fast import. Then there's lithium, critical to the electric vehicle future. Mexico has officially declared its Sonora lithium mines as strategic, putting United States access in question. That affects everything from Tesla's Gigafactory in Nevada to GM's Ultium battery line, adding a new layer of uncertainty to America's clean energy transition. Canada's list of countermeasures is just as aggressive. In the lumber sector alone, the United States already imposes over 20% in anti-dumping duties on Canadian softwood. In response, Ottawa is preparing import quotas on United States-made plywood, OSB, and even trucks hauling bricks across the border. But the retaliation doesn't stop at building materials. Canada is drafting new trade restrictions on raw wood, dairy, potatoes, aircraft landing gear, and aluminum body panels. These aren't random choices. They're aimed at swing state industries and supply chains that can't easily relocate. The message is loud and clear. If the United States hits North America with a tariff wall, Mexico and Canada will carve out new trade paths and leave America behind. If trade retaliation cuts deep, energy retaliation cuts to the bone. Canada holds one of the sharpest tools in this fight, Line 5, a critical pipeline that moves 540,000 barrels of crude oil per day to United States refineries in Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. Ontario Premier Doug Ford has now placed a partial shutdown of Line 5 on the table. If even one valve is closed, the U.S. Midwest could lose tens of thousands of barrels daily, tightening fuel supplies within days. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, a disruption like this could drive Midwest gasoline prices up by 12% in just 5 days. That means, well, price hikes, not only at the pump, but also for industries that rely heavily on fuel, from transport to agriculture. Electricity is next in line. Ontario currently exports power to Michigan and New York, keeping factories, furnaces, and homes running. But now, Ford is warning that those exports might be taxed, or cut altogether, if Trump's tariffs remain in place. That would create an immediate spike in wholesale electricity prices, hitting industrial furnaces, glass factories, and steel mills hard. Here's the irony. Trump says his tariffs will bring manufacturing back to the U.S., but the retaliation is raising the cost of the very energy those industries need to operate. It's like trying to build a house while someone is slowly turning off your electricity and charging you more for every nail. Energy isn't just a commodity, it's leverage, and Canada is holding a big part of that power grid in its hand. Trump's team is celebrating a short-term win. June's customs revenue hit $22.2 billion. The highest ever. They point to that number as proof the tariffs are working, but behind that headline is a much colder reality. Imports fell by 13% in the same period. So the government isn't making more money because trade is thriving. It's making more because everything costs more to bring in. And that extra cost, it's landing on ordinary Americans. We're already seeing the effects. Electronics from China jumped 6.4% in price between May and June. Lumber is up 15%, right as mortgage rates hover around 7%, slowing home construction and echoing the early pandemic housing crunch. Families trying to build or buy a home are suddenly facing second-wave sticker shock. In the grocery aisle, retaliation on corn and dairy could push prices even higher. Mexico's move to source corn from Brazil and Argentina threatens $8 billion in U.S. agricultural exports, hitting Midwestern farmers especially hard. At the same time, Canada is preparing to bypass EU dairy quotas, a clever strategy that could shove U.S. cheese and butter off Canadian shelves. And while Washington boasts about being tough on fentanyl, Customs and Border Protection data shows the drug hasn't stopped flowing. The tap hasn't been turned off, it's just trickling through new cracks. The question now is simple. Is this really a war on poison or a war on our own economy? Canada and Mexico are not just resisting. They're actually redesigning the North American trade map. Mexico is now rerouting its supply chains through Canada. Meanwhile, Canada is leveraging energy, lumber, and aluminum to apply pressure on the Great Lakes region. Together, they're slicing through the supply lines that have, kept North America connected for decades. So while the slogans shout, "We'll stop the poison at any price," the numbers, they whisper a warning. Inflation is climbing, imports are shrinking, supply chains are splintering, and voters, they'll feel it not in speeches but in Amazon boxes, grocery carts, gas pumps, and credit card statements. The final verdict won't be written by economists. It'll be cast in ballots. So what do you think? Will Trump's wall of tariffs finally stop the flow of fentanyl, or just cut America off from its closest allies and suppliers? Drop your thoughts in the comments. In our next report, we'll break down which industries are falling and which ones might be quietly winning. Stay tuned.